Pam Hurley is joining us today on the Communicative Leader. Pam is the owner of Hurley Write Inc., and for the past 30 years, she's been empowering professional corporate teams to become better writers and speakers. Her wealth of experience has allowed her to lead within the intersection of writing, technology, and leadership. And today we're going to talk about writing as problem solving and as the unsung hero of business efficiency. Hello and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Well, Pam, thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into our conversation, can you introduce yourself and your experience in both technical writing and leadership roles?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be on the podcast. So my name is Pam Hurley. I have a PhD in technical writing from the University of South Carolina. And I started the business about 35 years ago when I was only 10. Just kidding. You can see the video, that's a lie. So I've been the CEO of the company for the past 30 something years. And so, as a leader in the company, running your own business, you learn quite a bit. So so that's my background. I started in academia and then started the business.
Yeah, and that's great. And I appreciate all that you bring to the table, both with the technical expertise, the research that you've done, and then all of the time that you spent embodying leadership. So with that in mind, Pam, I'm wondering, a few things about technical writing in today's organization. So could you define the role for us and then tell us how leadership kind of interacts or plays into that role?
Sure, absolutely. So what's interesting to me is that we have a lot of professionals who are ill prepared to do any kind of technical writing in the workplace. So we work with professionals, we call them non-writers, because they don't want to write. And they get in, they get into their industry and they're like, oh gosh, I have to write. I was talking to an engineer the other day and I've heard this sentiment before. It's like, I didn't want to write. All I wanted to do was be an engineer. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So what happens is that, folks, graduate from college, master's, PhD, and they get into the workplace and they feel like, oh, all of a sudden I have to do technical writing. Well, I only had one semester of that in college. And then the expectation is by the organization is that they're prepared to do that. So then what happens, of course, is, leadership should be actively onboarding folks to be able to write particular documents, and they don't do that. And so because we have an expectation that they know how to write, but we don't have a standard for that. And so it's kind of an interesting dynamic in that, leaders should be taking a more active role in ensuring that we're helping people on board in any particular organization and learn how to write the kinds of documents that the organization expects.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because I think you're right. There's this expectation. You've earned this degree with bachelor's, master's, PhD. So we think, of course, you can write, but you can't necessarily write well or write well for the audience in which you're expected to do so.
Exactly.
Yeah, really, really great insight, Pam. And so when we're thinking about being a successful technical writer, what are some key qualities or skills that you believe in, your expertise make for that successful technical writer?
Right. So the professionals we work with aren't necessarily technical writers, but they have to write technical documents. And there's that distinction. So one of the things they have to be able to do well is to treat writing as problem solving.
Oh.
And they don't. right?
Yep.
Because writing
Yeah.
is often treated in an organization as, well, this is just something you have to do, but it's really not
Mhm.
important, or or it is
Yes.
important, but we're not going to train you how to do it, and it's that kind of thing. So it's really an interesting thing, in that companies will pay lip service to this idea of,
Mhm.
we want people to write well, but they don't give them the tools to do that,
Mhm.
right? And so one of
Yep.
the things we talk a lot about in our workshops is, you have to treat writing as problem solving. Writing is
Mhm.
problem solving on paper.
Yep.
And so, just as you would approach any problem you solve
Mhm.
in the workplace or in your personal life or whatever, writing is exactly the same thing, but it's not treated that way. So, strategy and planning are
Mhm.
the two most important things that any writer can do.
Mhm. Yes, and I imagine them when you use that language, when you help them with that frame, it becomes a lot more accessible to people who previously just saw it as some output or something they had to check off their list.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the professionals we work with, they're already great problem solvers.
Yep.
I mean, let's
Mhm.
be honest. If they weren't great problem solvers, they wouldn't be working,
Yep.
as in the fields that they do. But they've
Mhm.
just never been introduced to the idea that, the writing that they do, they're solving a problem. They're trying to communicate a particular message to a specific audience for a particular outcome or
Mhm.
action. And to your point, yeah, we go through the steps of problem solving with them, and then when they understand that, it does tend to make it a lot more accessible and understandable for them.
Yeah, very, very cool, Pam. I love that. And so, my follow up, you've kind of already touched on some of these, but I'm wondering how these key qualities or skills that help make someone a better writer, how do those same qualities contribute to them being an effective leader?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a parallel, right?
Hmm.
Because leaders are
Hmm.
involved in solving problems. It's the same
Yep.
same kind of idea. What's the problem I'm trying to solve, and then how do I go about it? And
Hmm.
so effective leaders solve problems, and they come up with multiple solutions to solve those problems. And so the
Hmm.
same thing is true with writing or communication. When you think about, how do I solve the problem, a lot of it depends on, who am I communicating with? What do
Hmm.
I know about them? I was having this discussion with two of our clients yesterday, and we were talking about, um, it was an email, but
Hmm.
you have to know how your audience is going to react to the information that you're providing, so that you can then structure the email in such a
Yep.
way that speaks to them. And so leaders
Hmm.
have to do that as well. It's funny. I was just looking at LinkedIn, and this guy got
Hmm.
laid off from Google, and I'm looking at this layoff notice, and I was just terrible. It's about we instead
Hmm.
of you. So we have to do this, or we got to do that, and da da da. And then at the end it
Hmm.
goes, and hey, we've got these resources to help you, instead of thinking
Oh.
about, not that Google, I shouldn't say cares is the wrong word,
Hmm.
but they should. But anyway,
Hmm. Yep.
layoffs are a difficult thing, but you also have to think about, long term, how am I going to be perceived? And we see this all the time with these PR
Hmm.
disasters,
Yep.
from these major companies, and a lot of it's just how they word things, and
Hmm.
how they let people go, and these kinds of things that speak to leadership.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, you're right. And talking about, when you were saying that, I was thinking they just didn't finish thinking through the problem solving, right? They
Exactly.
hit on some of the high points, of course, but without all of that due diligence, then we can easily look at it and say, ooh, this, you have that visceral reaction like this just doesn't feel right. This has a yicky, like a icky feel
Yes.
because it,
Yes.
it didn't hit the mark.
It didn't hit the mark. Yeah, no, that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly right. And you think, well, a company like Google, do they care? Do they need to care? You know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not. I don't know. Kind of
Mm-hmm.
Google rules the world, I guess.
Yep.
But
Yep.
you also think about things like, you also have to think about things like, long term, how are you going to be perceived, and those kinds of things. And we talk a lot about that, in our
Mm-hmm.
workshops as well. A lot of it is about how you're perceived in the workplace. And so a person who can't
Yeah.
communicate well in writing
Mhm.
is not perceived as being as competent as someone who can.
Mhm. Yep, exactly. Exactly. I that made me think I knew someone who would say good morning in an email, but it would be morning MOURNIG. Like you're
Oh,
literally saying good grief. Like this is what you are communicating. Um and again,
good.
really intelligent, high, many degrees, but taking the
But
time that communication felt below him. I think it just wasn't something that he believed needed his full attention. It's like, nope, let's backtrack. Let's unpack this a little bit.
yeah, I
So,
mean, to your point, I mean, you
hmm
think, and one little word
yeah. hmm
misspelled, misused, and you're like, this
hmm
guy's got all these degrees and everything, but it's like, oh gosh, I mean, it's
Exactly.
yeah, take a minute, as you said, take
Yep.
a minute.
Yep.
And when you make sure that your communication is up to par and
hmm
that you've taken the time, then people are going to perceive you as thoughtful and things like that. Little errors like that, people are
Exactly.
like, oh, they don't care, they didn't
Yes.
take the time, they're not diligent. I mean, speaks to
Yep.
all kinds of issues.
I agree. I truly do not ascribe the word expert. Even if they are in these certain rates, that is not my immediate adjective that I go
Right.
to when I'm seeing that. So
Exactly.
this is a perfect segue, Pam. So I know you have this idea, and I love this that you talk about writing as the unsung hero of business efficiency, and I love that. So can you kind of tell us more about this, kind of what went into your thought process, and what this looks like in an organization?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I'll make it short because it can be very long. But one of the things that we find is that people waste a tremendous amount of time and energy writing poor documents, reviewing, and you have these constant iterations
Mm-hmm.
because there's no process in place so that people are onboarded. People know what people know what's expected of them in terms of their writing. The review process is streamlined. There's a certain number of iterations, all this kind of stuff. So it's just kind of like the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
And that, well, hey, I'm going to write something, and then I'm going to write it for Leah, and then Leah's going
Mm-hmm.
to, mark it up, and then I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
get it back, and then oh, Leah's left. Now I have to write for Ben. And so
Mm-hmm.
people are constantly writing to this moving target instead of understanding that readability studies tell us what good writing is, and that applies to every document and every audience. So it doesn't matter who you're writing for, right? As long as you
Mm-hmm.
and that sounds contradictory, but what I mean by that is simply that the concepts of good writing remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if Ben says, oh, I just like bullets, okay, well, that doesn't mean that that's everything should be bulleted. That's just because Ben says that that's what he prefers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of these organizations, they just don't have a process in place, which creates this chaos when it comes to writing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of time and money wasted. I don't know if you've ever read Writing for Dollars, Writing to Please, but it's a book by Joseph Kimball, and he has all these great case studies in
Mm-hmm.
there about the amount of money that organizations have saved by rewriting and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. I mean, there's a real ROI on
Yeah.
writing and reviewing, and companies just don't realize it.
Yes. Yes. You're so right. 'Cause I think it's still seen as a soft skill, and everyone says, of course, lip service. I want this. We need this. This
Yes.
is so important. But in my experience, it oftentimes stops there. But as you're pointing out, and I think too, drafts, right? So someone will be working in Google Drive, someone will be working on a copy downloaded to their hard drive. When we have these large teams, and then we also include those rewrites and other preferences. And you're right, everyone there has spent a whole day, if not more, on something
Yeah,
that.
we worked with a client recently, and they were
Mm-hmm,
using Slack as their
mm-hmm,
as their way to make comments on people's
mm-hmm,
drafts. And you're reading these Slack comments, and it's just like,
mm-hmm.
well, you're treating it like Slack, and you're not treating it as a review, like using track changes in Word and that kind of thing. So, to your
Mm-hmm.
point, you have to think about what is the medium that people are using to get these things accomplished. So, if I'm using Slack, that channel does not lend itself well to making comments on
Yep.
people's writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing we see with PowerPoints. Like we have a client recently, and they're using PowerPoints for their proposals and for their presentations. Not that that's
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a bad thing, but those are
Yeah.
two different uses. And so what that requires is that we have a different PowerPoint for proposals and we have a different PowerPoint for the presentations.
Mm-hmm.
And people were actually, when they were doing their oral presentations with these PowerPoints, people are getting up and walking out.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
These were
Mm-hmm.
higher ups in the government, and they were
Yep.
like, nah, nope, not sitting through this junk.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And so that is a perfect example for this next question. So, and you might even tease that one out a little more. I imagine you have others, but I'm wondering if you could share a specific instance from your experience where we have effective writing that has led to improved outcomes.
Oh, we have so many case studies of that, Leah. I mean,
Hmm.
we have case study after case study after case study. And I will tell you that most of our
Hmm.
business is repeat business, and there's a
Hmm.
reason for
Yeah.
that. I mean, companies continue to hire us. So
Hmm.
we have, I was working on a case study yesterday, and it was a pharma company, and they said that compliance has increased by about 30% since we helped them rewrite
Wow.
their SOPs. So
Hmm.
it's things like that. Some of it is, confidence levels. We measure confidence as
Hmm.
well. Confidence levels are typically up in most of the
Hmm.
organizations we work with. So a lot of it is, long term kinds of,
Hmm.
we do follow ups 3 months, 6 months, that kind of thing, and ask them to measure those things for us in terms of what they're
Hmm.
seeing. Some of it's anecdotal, but some of it is real. Asking them
Yeah.
about the number of iterations they're going through, the number of reviews they're going through, have they cut down the time, that kind of thing. And so we have, yes, lots of case studies on that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if we just think a 30% increase in compliance, I imagine every
It's
company is
huge.
like, wow,
Yes,
how? Tell me
I
how.
know,
Yeah,
it's huge. It's
yeah.
huge.
That's incredible, Pam. So this is, probably in line with the SOPs you're talking about and some of these other, meatier documents that you're helping organizations with. We know a lot of times this technical writing, we have jargon, we have really complex concepts. So how can either writers or those employees who are serving that technical writing function, how can they communicate effectively with both technical and non-technical team members or audiences?
That is a great question. So what most professionals we work with tend to do is they tend to communicate. So they tend to assume.
Mhm.
So I'm going to assume that you know what I mean. I'm going to assume that you understand this jargon. I'm going to
Mhm.
make all these assumptions. And they don't do that because they're lazy, but they do that because that's the easiest thing to do.
Yep.
And quite frankly, a lot of them haven't been taught any different.
Yep.
This is what we do. And so one of the
Mhm.
things we talk a lot about is writing so that somebody who is unfamiliar with the topic can understand it. Now that doesn't mean just jargon and that kind of thing. It
Mhm.
also means structuring paragraphs and sentences according to what readability studies tell
Mhm.
us is how readers read. But
Mhm.
yeah, people do tend to, and they use, I'm going to use the biggest word I possibly can
Yep.
because it makes me sound smart.
Mhm.
And if you think about the way academia teaches people how to
Oh,
write, that
exactly.
right, that's what we're
100%.
taught. Yes,
Mhm.
let's get
Yep.
our thesaurus and
Yeah.
let's find as
Yep.
many synonyms as we
Mhm.
can for a particular word. When all that does is just confuse the issue. Use the same
Mhm.
stinking word over and over and over again.
Mhm.
Yes, you should, because you're
Mhm.
trying to drive home a point. And when you switch terminology, which is
Mhm.
something we see a lot, when you switch
Yes.
terminology, all you're doing is raising questions on the part of the reader. Your objective as a writer is to guide readers. You're the Sherpa, and you're taking readers on the journey. And if the reader comes to an
Yep.
incorrect conclusion, that is on you. That
Mhm.
is not on the reader. And I went on a tangent there, but
Yeah. Yep. No, I really appreciate that. And I think it shows the responsibility of writing that a lot of people, again, when they kind of dismiss this and this is just the last thing you need to do on a checklist for a project, that really shortchanges everything.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. Yeah, and that's how a lot of people view it. And one of the things,
Yep.
we talk about with clients is the document is the deliverable
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't matter what you do behind the scenes. If you can't report that in a way that your intended reader can understand and take the
Yep.
required action, it doesn't really matter what you did.
Exactly. And so, a follow up to that. So, what role? So, the titled leaders in organizations, whether it's a C suite or at the managerial level, how can they help to, enhance the role of communication and technical writing? What is kind of their responsibility in changing the way that their teams or their organizations see this part of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, they should value it and show their team that that is valued by either getting them help, whatever that is, whether that's a
Mm-hmm.
writing course with Hurley, right? Or whether
Yep.
that is mentoring within the
Mm-hmm.
organization or whatever it is, you've got to show your team that you value it by getting them the tools that they need. It's kind of amazing
Mm-hmm.
when you think about, I'm going to become an engineer and I go into this whatever firm it is, and they give me all
Mm-hmm.
the tools I need to engineer, but they don't give me the tools I need to improve my writing or enhance my writing
Yep.
or figure out what I need in my writing. And
Yep.
that's actually what I'm going to be delivering. So it's
Yeah.
just it's mind blowing. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is they have to be role models in terms of communication and really assess how are you
Mm-hmm.
communicating? Are your
Mm-hmm.
emails full of stuff? Does it take too long to get to the point? Are
Mm-hmm.
your meetings rambling? I mean, what? How are you modeling
Mm-hmm.
good communication? Because people look to you to be that role model. So if you're not taking the time to write good documents or give people the time they need to write, if it's constantly, oh, you got to get this done, 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 done by 5 o'clock today,
Mm-hmm.
then what you're telling people is, I don't really value the writing that you do. This is just something that has to get done. And
Yep.
so leaders need to really assess and be
Mm-hmm.
very honest with themselves about how are you treating communication in your workplace and how are you modeling good communication.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think too often those entitled leadership positions forget how impactful their behaviors are.
Yes.
And I cringe as a leadership communication scholar when people say, do as I say, not as I do. I'm like, no, no, you need to find yourself another manager or another mentor.
Yes.
That's exactly what we're hearing here. Yeah.
It's really interesting. We have a client, they're consultants, and we were talking and his manager is just terrible at giving feedback. And so one of the
Mhm.
manager's comments was, make this crisper,
Mhm.
as though it's lettuce or something. So he
Yeah.
goes to the manager. I mean, he was making a concerted effort to find out from his manager what the comment meant. Because
Hmm.
managers, if you're giving comments, you are responsible for being able to explain what those comments mean. And
Yep.
oftentimes they don't. It's just kind of like, well, here, just take it. So he went to his
Yeah.
manager and he said, what do you mean? And his manager said to him, your predecessor knew what that meant, and I'm sorry, you don't. I mean,
Oh,
right?
wow. Yep. Wow.
I mean, it's
Oh,
shocking, really, when you
yes.
think about
Hmm.
some of those things. And this guy, he was honest. He's like, I'm just about to quit the job because my
Hmm.
manager,
Yep.
as a consultant, they
Hmm.
were involved in writing reports constantly. And
Yeah.
he said the feedback that I'm getting from my manager is so poor, it's causing me so much stress
Hmm.
that he was really thinking about quitting his job. And that's another thing that leaders need to understand. if
Hmm.
if people don't have a clear idea of what they're trying to do in terms of communication, it can create a lot of stress in the
Hmm.
workplace,
Hmm.
animosity, and it's
Yep.
not just this kind of thing where we do it. It's communication is the backbone
Hmm.
of any good organization.
Exactly. Yep. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think other thing is a lot of our title leaders don't think about 2 steps out, 3 steps, 4 steps out. And this gentleman in this example telling other friends in the area, like, nope, I wouldn't do it. It's
Yes.
not, I wouldn't use that company. I would not fill that role. Right. So things like that. And that word of mouth now is the most powerful, I think, in my opinion, form of persuasion that we're seeing.
I think you're 100% right. Just like I
Mm-hmm.
was talking about that Google
Mm-hmm.
layoff letter. I mean, this guy posted it on LinkedIn.
Yep. Yep.
So
Exactly.
all these people are going to see
Yeah.
this. So you're right.
Yep.
It's not just this kind of, in a vacuum.
Yep.
Social media and everything else. And to your point, people are going to talk to
Mm-hmm.
other people, and it's just it's kind of crazy how
It
little
is.
leaders oftentimes think about the communication that they are modeling in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace.
Yep. Yep. I agree. So, this again, really nice follow up question. So, what are some of these common obstacles that you have seen, probably with people coming to you to learn how to write better or to help facilitate better writing in their organizations? So, what are some of these really common experiences that pop up when people are saying, our team just can't communicate to our vendors, or we can't communicate to our audience or our stakeholders, whatever that is?
Yeah, so a lot of people just assume, one of the calls we get most often is, well, they can't communicate and it's because they need grammar help. Grammar help is the last thing they need. I can
Yep.
promise you
Yep.
that your team's problem is not grammar. Research
Mhm.
has even shown that teaching grammar actually can worsen the way that people write.
Mhm.
So, what we try to do with folks, with prospects, is we do what we call a communication audit to help
Mhm.
them understand where are the problems coming from. The other thing that
Mhm.
they do, which I think I've alluded to, is they tend to blame the writers
Yep.
when sometimes it's not the writers, it's the
Mhm.
reviewers, because people are getting
Mhm.
conflicting feedback. There's no real assessment. They don't really know where the problem is. They don't even know at what level their team is writing, right? Where are they and where do they
Mhm.
need to be? So there's this total lack of recognition about any of that. It's just an assumption or a hunch. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the reasons that we do, we do the communication audit with folks, is so that we
Mhm.
can get in there, figure out what the real problems are, present the findings to them, and then they can do with those findings what they will. If they want to
Okay.
hire us, great. If they want to do something
Mhm.
else, great. But at least they then have a basic understanding of where
Mhm.
the issues are, and then they can begin to fix them.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so great that you start with the audit to help them see. Because I think you're right. When, especially in organizations, high stress and a lot of pressure on teams and organizations. So when it's not going well, it's a lot easier to point fingers and say, "Oh,
Yes.
this is this tip of the iceberg. This is what I think it must be." Um, so with that in mind, Pam, are there a couple, if someone just came to you and said, our communication is not working, do you have like one strategy or two strategies or tips for someone to do right away to kind of assess that or overcome a challenge?
Well, one of the things we again we try to do is to get them to allow us to do the communication audit.
Hmm.
But if they don't do that, and again, they have to be really honest
Hmm.
about the writing that they're doing, the onboarding that they're doing. How are they onboarding
Yeah.
people? I mean, do you have an onboarding program, or you just, I was
Hmm.
talking to a client the other day, and I've had to spend so much time on
Hmm.
my own trying to figure out what
Hmm.
this organization wants from me in terms of my writing. And that just
Oh,
shouldn't be. I mean, he said, I
yeah.
had no idea. I was just kind of left on my own. And so he's struggling to. So be really honest. Do you have an
Hmm.
onboarding? I mean, what does that look like? If you don't have one,
Hmm.
why not?
Hmm.
It's not that difficult to
Yep.
institute, but is it just kind of willy nilly and, hey, here's a document, figure it
Hmm.
out kind of thing, which is what people are going to do is, either copy and paste or cut, use that as a model
Hmm.
and
Yep.
cut and paste. But so that's the first thing. You've got to be really honest about what your
Hmm.
issues are. And are you a
Hmm.
good leader? Are you a good model? Are you
Hmm.
modeling good communication? Are you giving people the time they need to write, which is a big one? There's
Yep.
to your point. It's like we're busy, we're rushed, we're blah blah blah.
Hmm.
Okay, well, maybe there's opportunities that you can give people to spend more time writing, because writing
Hmm.
takes time to be
Yeah.
proficient at it. It takes time. It's not something that you can just dash off.
Yeah. Yeah. And in my experience, and I imagine you've seen this too, excuse me, it's, we invest some time now, but we save a lot of time later once we
Absolutely.
establish these processes, or, we give people the tools that they need to be successful.
That's 100% correct. I mean, and that's what people don't get. They want that quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to tell you, there's no quick fix with writing. And people are like
Yep.
all agog about AI. I'm telling AI is not a
Yep.
fix,
Mm-hmm.
folks. If you think it
Yep.
is, you don't know much about AI. We're
Yep.
just not there yet. There is no quick fix.
Yep. Yep.
Good writing takes time. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
put the time and effort into it. You can get
Mm-hmm.
people proficient. A lot of people, and you know this as well as I do. So, oh, writing is something you're born with or you're not. No, it's not.
Oh,
It is
no.
not. It drives me
Yep.
crazy.
Yep. I am with you on that, Pam, 100%. So with this in mind, what does ongoing professional development look like when we're trying to become the best writers that we can be?
So that's a great question. So we have within our program, we have a complete program, right? It starts with the audit, and then we have an LMS, and we have webinars, and we have
Mm-hmm.
coaching, and so we try to make sure that people are able to practice, because good writing takes practice. It's not
Yeah.
something you can just do for 5 minutes and
Mm-hmm.
we're done, we're
Yep.
good. And so we have a lot of things in place for writers to continue to hone their skills and continue
Mm-hmm.
to get the expert feedback. And again, we try to do like a before and an
Mm-hmm.
after, and then everything in between that the client needs. So sometimes it's office hours. We do office hours.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's professional webinars. Sometimes it's coaching. A lot of it just depends on the client and their needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're in it. You're pointing out the importance of reflection in being a thoughtful writer and communicator, and recognizing where do we feel confident, what are areas that we feel shaky and need a little feedback on. So I love all
Absolutely.
those ideas you provided.
Great. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, you've got to be honest. You can't just assume
Mm-hmm.
that you know what the problem is.
Yeah. So, Pam, I have two final questions for you. So, on the Communicative Leader, we like to leave listeners with pragmatic leadership or communication tips. It can be advice, it can be a challenge. So, to that end, what advice do you have for our titled formal leaders?
Understand where your writers are and what they need. That's
Mm-hmm.
advice, and that's also a challenge, because that's not an easy
Yes.
thing to do. But you need to be really honest with your writers, where they are, but also with your reviewers. What does your review process look like? And are your reviewers contributing to the writing problem? Because many times they are. We tend to put a lot of
Mm-hmm.
faith and trust in our reviewers,
Yep.
and sometimes they're contributing to the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really important here, right? Because I think that it needs to be a feedback loop, and a lot of times it's not.
It's not exactly. You're right. It's
Yep.
like I'm going to write it and give it to you, and you're going to mark it up, and then instead of this
Yep.
dialogue, everybody
Yeah.
has a dog in the fight. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not how we treat our documents. To your point, it's not like
Exactly. Yep.
everybody has a dog in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell I'm a
And fine.
Southerner.
Yeah. Final question for you. So we just talked about some advice for our formal leaders. What do you want to leave employees, all ranks across all industries? Same thing, kind of advice, tips, or challenge for them.
Yeah, so I think the advice is to understand that writing is a process, and that good writing takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It is not something that you can do in 5 minutes. Give yourself time and grace to reflect as you suggest,
Mm-hmm.
and to do all the things that need to be done in the writing process, instead of just treating it as something that I could just get done in 15 minutes. And here's the other thing about that, and you can cut this out if you want to. Obviously, you can do whatever you want. But anyway, one of the things we find is that when people do that, when people don't give themselves the time and space,
Mm-hmm.
they do what we call overwriting. And so the
Mm-hmm.
document is twice as long as it would have been or should have been if they just taken the time to reflect. So while they hate writing, they're actually doing more writing than they should if they had just
Yeah.
taken the time to plan and reflect and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's so powerful, right? Especially if you say, okay, writing is this, unfortunate part of my job that I have to do. This is not what I signed up for. This is not what I went to school for. And then
Right.
to actually spend more time doing it than you need to, right?
Yes,
I mean, that's just that's some some irony for you there. But like, to your point,
absolutely.
taking that step back and thinking about it as a process, and I will always think about writing now as problem solving. I think that's ingenious and a way to connect it with everyone across any boundaries or differences or identities, because I mean truly that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Hmm.
it is as important as any task that
Hmm.
anyone does in the workplace at any given day, unless you're a
Hmm.
brain surgeon. Maybe it's not as important there,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Oh gosh, right, patient notes, right?
right. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Oh, well, Pam, it has really been a pleasure chatting with you today. I want to thank you for the incredible work that you're doing and the way
Well,
that
thank
you're
you.
helping to transform organizations and employees' experiences in such a positive way.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much for having me, Lee. I certainly do appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.